do this the opposite way.
High fly ball, deep left field. Oh, 27 does it again.
God, Fernando Tatis Jr. with a 2-run shot has the Padres on the board.
Go. That's his 11th. Driven out to deep center field. Going back, Springer turning, looking, see ya. Oh, what a shot by Judge. The Yankees lead 1-0.
Hey guys, welcome to our second episode of Free Baseball. It's just going to be me and Jake today. Isaiah couldn't make it. Sorry about that. But we got a lot to talk about in the world of baseball today. Obviously, everyone knows what's on our mind about the Hall of Fame and Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're actually going to start with Major League Baseball and the Players Union meeting yesterday to discuss the new collective bargaining agreement. And not a whole lot actually happened. What are your thoughts? Jake, can you run it down?
Yeah. So, not really much happened. I'm pulling up a tweet from Jeff Passan that described what happened from the other day. But like we thought would happen, not much progress was going to be made because the MLB is looking to get an upper edge on the MLBPA in these negotiations after they've already gained an upper edge in a financial aspect prior to these negotiations. But Passan said after they had met for the second day in a row that the MLB agreed to accept parameters of a pre-arbitration process bonus pool for top 30 WAR players. And the MLBPA was seeking $105 million while the league offered $10 million. So you can see that they're very far off on their negotiations and that the MLB wants more money for players before they get to arbitration and for those top 30 WAR players who would most likely be Super 2 eligible. So paying players before they get Super 2 eligible. But as you can see, there's not too much progress going on there as they're so far off on the numbers. And ultimately, the MLB withdrew their offer to change the arbitration structure. So it'll most likely stay the same. It's just going to be a change to most likely the minimum wage or, like I just said, the bonus pool for pre-arbitration players.
Yeah, we were talking about it before the show, but it seems like Major League Baseball's offer is just kind of like just trying to do the bare minimum to just keep talks kind of going, but not really trying at the same time. They added a thing we both kind of thought was weird in their proposal, and it was that clubs would get draft picks if their top prospects got a full year of service in their rookie season. And it also says if they subsequently receive award recognition. And we were talking about, Jake said it was ridiculous that, good teams bring up their good prospects, and if they perform well, they just get rewarded with more prospects. Where teams have a completely destroyed farm system, you just let them die too, because they're adding in that they want a draft lottery for the top 3 picks. And you can't get a top 3 pick. I think it's consecutive years in a row. So if a team's not like the Orioles, not so much actively tanking, just actively being terrible, they just kind of get thrown by the wayside almost. Doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, I think the only way that makes sense is if teams are if they're trying to incentivize teams to come out of rebuilds early. Like the Orioles are maybe a couple years away from really being in contention, but they have some really good top prospects. So like if next year they were forced to call up Bryson Rodriguez or Adley Rutschman, who they'll probably call up anyway, if those guys got called up and the Orioles weren't really more competitive, but they ended up getting another draft pick, I wonder if that would actually work, if the Orioles would actually feel like the incentive is worth it to lose an extra year of control for those top prospects in exchange for more top prospects. But I don't know. In the end, I think the players or the team should be calling up those prospects anyway, and to reward them for doing what's right seems pretty silly.
Right. It's rewarding them for doing the bare minimum. And teams do it all the time, and you hear about it everywhere where service time will get manipulated, and they added in that they wanted this specifically in the deal. So players that are in their rookie year will get a full year of service time. So it will be, if a team's forced to call up their top prospect, they just kind of piss away a year of service time that they kind of need if they're going to have any hopes of staying competitive. This proposal seems like it just kills small market teams, is what it does. It seems like a team like, I don't know, just for an example, like the Rangers, if they had to call up like Joey Gallo, and it's like, okay, well, here's a year of service time. We're not going to be competitive. Just go out there, play, and then we'll probably trade. Or the Royals doing it with like, what's his name?
Bobby Witt.
Yeah, Bobby Witt. Like if they had to call up Bobby Witt and they're not going to compete in that division, it's just you lose a year of service time on your number one prospect. It just seems counterintuitive to actually having teams come out of rebuilds, because they'll come out of a rebuild and be mediocre and lose their players and then go back to a rebuild and then do it all over again is what it feels like. Feels like it just kind of, instead of changing parity, it feels like it keeps it where it is and kind of locks it in, which I think is terrible.
Yeah. I think on the flip side of that, though, is that the only reason that we think that teams in small markets can't afford to keep their players around is because the owners say that they can't, and those are blatant lies because the owners just choose not to spend more money. So like a team like the A's have one of the richest owners, and you wouldn't think that because they have such a low payroll year in and year out. So I think a lot of that is just how we perceive the owner's payroll, and the owners definitely have more money than they tend to spend on the teams. Like just look at Steve Cohen. He's spending he's spending so much more than all the other teams, yet he's spending such a small percentage of his personal wealth. So I think any team that's complaining about being small market is just trying to find excuses so that they don't have to spend extra money to keep players around, or they can just choose to trade everybody away. Like the Rays too, the A's, all of those teams that are in that situation. It's definitely all choice of the owners, the people with all the money.
Right. A quote came out this week, and it's from Dick Monfort, and who's the owner of the Colorado Rockies. And he said that he basically came out and just said, oh, it's really expensive to afford a team. Like you have to pay payroll and security and have to deal with COVID. And it's like, I saw a tweet about it, and it was likening it to, well, if I want a Ferrari, I don't go to the Ferrari dealership and ask for a discount on a Ferrari. Like, if I can afford it, I can afford it.
Yeah.
If I can't, I don't buy a Ferrari.
Exactly.
Like, they went and had Nolan Arenado, who's one of the best players of the last 10 years. And they gave him a pretty garbage contract that had a bunch of opt-outs. They gave him almost no guaranteed money because it had a ton of opt-outs that he said he wasn't going to exercise, and that's why they traded him. So they had no financial obligation to have Arenado after they've run their team like complete garbage, and now he says it's too expensive to run your team.
Well, on top of that,
team not like garbage anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. On top of that, Monfort wasn't present in the second day of negotiations. So yesterday he wasn't present because there's like legal, I was reading about this on Twitter earlier today, but there's legal stuff that says that if the teams or the owners are saying that they can't afford certain things, then they have to make their finances public, which is exactly what they don't want to do. That's how they've gotten away with so much of this stuff and all this lying, saying that they don't have enough money, blah, 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 blah. But if you actually say that you can't afford something, then you have to start showing your finances. And they basically, the MLB was just like, all right, Dick, you're not gonna be here tomorrow. You messed up. You're putting us in a bad situation. And he's one of the dumbest owners. He's got no idea what's going on, how to make a good baseball team, all of that.
My favorite quote from him was about if he would fire his GM, and he said that he would fire himself first. And that's all you really need to know about.
He knows.
That's all you need to know about some of the owners in the league, that they're just trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. Like they can't afford anything. These guys are billionaires. These teams cost billions of dollars to buy. It's not just free. Someone wasn't like, oh no, we're not making any money. please take this from me. No, they're making good enough money. It's just they want to make more money.
Yeah.
Keep that from the players.
It was the same thing during the shortened season when the minor league season was canceled and they just had the alternate sites, and teams like the A's and I think even the Nationals were not going to pay their minor leaguers while they weren't playing. And individual players like Sean Doolittle he must have been with the Nationals at that time, wanted to pay all of the minor leaguers, and like he could do that because he's obviously like a Major League Baseball player that's made some money, but those owners are way higher than the MLB players. Like me compared to an MLB player is an MLB player compared to an owner. Is that disparity of income and stuff. So the fact that like the players can go and pay for minor leaguers and stuff just show that the owners just are super greedy, because we saw once those players started paying the minor leaguers, the owners were like, oh, okay. Yeah, I know I look like a jerk right now, not paying these minor leaguers salaries while they're not allowed to play, while they can't play because of the pandemic. But yeah, I don't know. I think most people agree with us that the owners are abusing their power, abusing their ability to keep their finances hidden, and do a lot of not telling the truth to the media and to the fans and stuff. And we should all be taking the Players Association side because that's what we can more relate with.
Right. It's literally a union standing up to a business. And that's why a lot of people don't trust Rob Manfred. And that's why we've given him a bunch of help. And it's because he's a spokesman for the business. He's the HR manager coming out and telling the union to chill out and trying to settle everything. He works for the owners. The players work for basically themselves right now is what it amounts to. And we'll get away from the union debater. We'll be here for an hour, and we'll get into something else that we'll complain about for probably an hour. And it's going to be the Hall of Fame update. Everyone knows what happened yesterday. David Ortiz, the lone member in the 2022 class. Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Curt Schilling fall off the ballot, along with Sammy Sosa. Yeah, along with Sammy Sosa, but he never really had a chance. The big one that everyone's talking about is Bonds, obviously. It's honestly a terrible look for baseball as a whole to now not have your all-time hits leader, your all-time home runs leader, and with Roger Clemens, your all-time leader in Cy Young's one, not in the Baseball Hall of Fame. You're not going to put them in the museum about baseball. It doesn't make any sense. And I honestly feel like, of course, Barry Bonds did himself no favors with the perjury case and the Balco scandal, but I honestly feel like a lot of it is left up to, he was just kind of a jerk to reporters. So this is more of like a throw it back in his face kind of thing. We're your judge, jury, and executioner on if you get in the Hall of Fame. And he was never really all that great of a guy. Like when compared to someone like David Ortiz, who always had a real outgoing, upbeat, nice personality, is what I think it amounts to. Not entirely, but I think it definitely factored in. What do you think?
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. Like Ortiz is one of the most liked players, especially by the media, by Manfred. He personally went out of his way to discard what the Balco had said about Ortiz, saying that there were a bunch of false tests from those that testing process, and that he explicitly said that voters should reconsider Ortiz's case and not think of him as a cheater because those tests weren't so great at the time, and they resulted in so many false positives, like I said. But yeah, I definitely agree that if Barry Bonds was more liked by the media, by the fans, other than Bay Area sports fans who adored him, I definitely think he would have had a greater chance. I think that the same for Schilling. He pretty much is only kept out for his personality, for his detrimental takes on politics and such, just spewing hate speech and etc. But yeah, I really think Bond should have gotten in, and it's sort of a disgrace. It sort of makes the Hall of Fame pointless. But congrats to Big Papi. He deserves it big time.
Yeah, I think the big thing to take away from all of this is not to try to discredit David Ortiz and instead examine just why is it that Bonds got left out. It's not an either or. It's not like a, well, if Ortiz got in, then Bonds can't get in. It's like a, no, they should all be in, but they didn't do that. And it's honestly, for me, it's a black eye on not so much the sport, but it's a black eye on the voting process, which a lot of people are now questioning. And it's rightfully so. I mean, the whole reason they changed the voting process over from having, former players and former managers and general managers vote on players to get in was cronyism. And now this feels like almost like a reverse cronyism, where it's like I said, I am your judge, jury, and executioner on if you get in. And a lot of these writers are, it's a mix of ages from young to old. And it feels like a lot of the older voters just didn't vote for Barry Bonds and didn't vote for Roger Clemens. And it's like, well, where do you draw the line at who you're going to let in? Because I mean, like it or not, with these three guys, on-field product alone, I mean, you can hate Barry Bonds, you can hate Roger Clemens, and you can hate Curt Schilling. And if you look at their stats on a page and compare them to other Hall of Famers, you can't make the argument that these guys just don't belong, because they absolutely do. Like, what do you think? What do you think on that end? Do you think the voting process needs to be changed? And how would you go about changing it if it does?
I definitely think one of the major problems with the voting process is the anonymity of so many voters, the fact that they can choose to remain anonymous. As we were tracking before the results were shown, Bonds and Clemens were both over 75% on all public ballots. And if you go back and you look a couple of years ago, I don't know exactly which year it was, but the BBWAA voted on whether or not to make all of the public's ballot, and the voting result was, I think, 80-9. And the Hall chose not to recognize that voting and keep it the way it is, make it optional to make your ballots public. And as we saw, Bonds and Clemens fell from 76-75% all the way down to 66-65% because of those 40%, 30% of ballots that aren't public. And so I think that would make a big change, just to hold voters accountable, to allow people to express their distaste for ballots that are blank, and etc. I definitely think making it so that writers can't turn in blank ballots is also a way to help. And I think not limiting voters to voting for 10 players would also help, because I think a lot of times people look at a ballot and they say there's more than 10 Hall of Famers on this list, so I have to choose I have to strategically choose who I want to keep on the ballot. And sometimes that can negatively affect people that deserve to stick on it, like Joe Nathan, who we were talking about before we hopped on.
Yeah, he missed it by 0.7% to stay on the ballot, and there were 6 ballots that were blank, not submitted. 6 blank ballots. And I especially don't understand that. And I understand some people are like, keep the Hall small kind of thing. But if you see the ballot, you can look at it and vote strategically, at least, so someone gets a fair chance at it. Like Joe Nathan, he might not be a Hall of Famer, but he's not a one and done either. But then you have guys that stick on that just miss it in the first opportunity, like one that's going to come up for the Today's Game committee that I would want to talk about too. It's Kenny Lofton. Kenny Lofton got kicked off the ballot in his first try, and Kenny Lofton's a surefire Hall of Famer. And stats back that up. The eye test backs that up. Like, you have guys that fall off the ballot because people just won't vote, or are only going to vote for 4 out of 10. And then you see a million ballots from newer voters where there will be 10, and then you have to leave someone off. I know I had that problem. We were filling out mock ballots, and I wanted to vote for Joe Nathan because my idea was to keep him on the ballot. But then I have to leave off Jeff Kent or Todd Helton or someone else that really deserves to be in consideration or be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
It's a bad policy to have it like that. And I actually liked an idea from Ian Happ, And Ian Happ put it out there that what if you let players current and former that have amassed 10 years plus of service time to vote? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that could be interesting. I don't know. It's sort of hard to tell if the problem's really the people that are voting on it or if it's the rules.
Yeah, I think that's also a really big point of contention. I mean, yeah, the rules suck, but I mean, the people that didn't vote, they suck. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And I always hated seeing a blank ballot because especially now, it feels like you're using the blank ballot. Especially, I know there was a big outrage earlier. I think it was earlier this year or last year, whenever, when no one got in, and a couple people posted that they had a blank ballot and actually made it public, and they caught an endless amount of hell for that, just because at that point you're using your ballot to get up on a soapbox and grandstand of I'm more morally right than these players, and they shouldn't get in, like a Bonds and like a Clemens and like a Schilling and like Sammy Sosa and all these other players like Andy Pettit, stuff like that are steroids guys. It's like, oh, well, I'm not going to vote for them because, and that never sat right with me.
Yeah, I agree. Big time. It's highly disappointing to not have Bonds and Clemens in specifically as two of the greatest of what they did at their position. Not even just in baseball. I think in just all jobs in general, Bonds is one of the greatest baseball players of all time. You put him in any other job, you put him in McDonald's, he's gonna be the store owner like that. He just he really took the game to another level, and it's going to be up to the Veterans Committee to vote him in. But I'm pretty sure next year he'll get the chance with the modern day committee. So this debate is nowhere close to over.
Yeah, and I think I know Curt Schilling even made it a point, and he's told voters not to vote for him. He said, I don't want to be voted in by the Baseball Writers Association of America. Don't vote me in. I'll get in on the Veterans Committee. And he's, as much as you don't like Curt Schilling or don't like what he has to say, he's probably really right. Yeah, he's probably right. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame pitcher. And I mean, and like it or not, I mean, there's several other baseball players in private probably share the same beliefs as him. So they don't hold that against him like a lot will.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a completely different ball game. And I want to gauge your opinion on some of the gainers, since there weren't honestly too many, and especially too many momentous gainers. Who was your biggest surprise to see either their rise or fall in the voting? Or who was your biggest surprise percent? I mean, Alex Rodriguez got 34%.
Oh yeah, I was surprised by that. I feel like that's what I guessed on the Hall of Fame predictions, was around like 35 to 40% for him. Or maybe that's what I guessed for Ortiz, which would have been way off.
I think that's
but
right.
Yeah,
that kind of hovers around the same amount Bonds got in his first go around, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what I was comparing him to, was how Bonds started, because he's got the Hall of Fame resume paired with the steroid accusations and positive tests and such. But yeah, seeing A-Rod at 34.3%. It's not surprising. I think that's where I would have guessed. I think that's what I expected him to start at, but it does show that he's got a long road to go, similar to Barry, and that there's no guarantee that he reaches there in 10 years, no matter how much he changes his public perception going forward. But yeah, pretty interesting to see him that low. Nowhere near. He needs over 60% more. No, that's not good math. 40% more to get there. But yeah, seeing Sheffield and Andrew Jones and Billy Wagner climbing is pretty cool. All three of those guys are over 40%. I don't really have a complete understanding of Sheffield's steroid accusations and such, so I'm not sure where to stand on that. But it's definitely interesting to see these guys with sort of borderline Hall of Fame cases. I mean, not with Sheffield. Sheffield's one of the greatest hitters of all time if you take into account everything that he did across his career. But guys like Andrew Jones and Billy Wagner, who originally didn't get a lot of support, are now garnering that support as the ballot sort of clears up. And next year, I think we'll really see what guys like Rollins and Helton and Wagner should actually be getting votes wise, as people don't have to keep the Bonds and Clemens and Schilling on their minds anymore.
Yeah, that's more or less what I'm thinking of. Next year's ballot isn't as strong. So now you just kind of have to see where the guys that were kind of on the outside looking in at this whole debate really fall. Rollins got 63.2%, which don't quote me on that, but I want to say that was probably around like a 6-7%. Well, I think he got like a 6 or 7% jump. And he might have been the biggest one, if that's right. But you have guys that are kind of hovering around the 50% line, like Billy Wagner, Todd Helton, and then even a little bit lower, like you said, Gary Sheffield and Alex Rodriguez. I especially think it's weird now for Alex Rodriguez. Where does Alex Rodriguez fall? If you have set a precedent, Bonds and Clemens aren't in, and they never failed a test. Alex Rodriguez, who has failed a test and actively admitted to using when he was on the Rangers, which would have been in his prime, it's hypocritical to vote him in if that's the precedent. And that honestly kind of, for me, is one of the biggest storylines of next year's voting, is what happens with A-Rod, what happens with Sheffield, and what happens with like Pettit, even though Pettit won't get in. But it's a really weird line that they have to toe. I think the only other newcomer that even stayed on the ballot was Jimmy Rollins. This was not. Yeah, Jimmy Rollins stayed on the ballot. He had a 9.4%.
That one MVP.
Yep.
That's all it took.
He's not, in my mind, he's not a Hall of Fame player, but I know he had quite a few fans on MLB Network. I don't remember which one it was that voted for him, but it was one of the big talking heads. But you have guys that fell off the ballot after the first try, like Tim Hudson, who you could maybe make an argument for. And my pick that I wanted to stay on was Joe Nathan, because I think, especially now, if Joe Nathan had retired a year later, I think he would have stayed on the ballot. Because next year, say Billy Wagner takes a jump, and then the year afterwards, if Nathan stays on the ballot, again, he'd have to stay on for 2 years. But if Billy Wagner gets either close to getting in or does get in, you have to open it up to relievers. And I know a lot of people are like, well, why do you value relievers being in the Hall of Fame? Well, why do you value anybody being in the Hall of Fame? It's a position just like any other player. I mean, they can't help that they only get to pitch 1 inning a game. It's not really up to them, you know. If the manager wants to put him in, they put him in. If they don't want to put him in, they don't put him in. And Billy Wagner and Joe Nathan stack up as, you know, some of the by rate basis, some of the best pitchers ever. And I know I've said it before. It's like ERA plus. I think both of them are in like the only 9 players that have. I want to say it's 900. It's like 900
greater than
innings
150 ERA plus and 900 innings.
Yeah, both. 2 of them are on that list, and I want to say some of the other ones that are like Mariano Rivera and Sandy Koufax. Like, go ahead and read it off.
All right, it's number 1 with 154 ERA plus is Pedro Martinez. Then you got Clayton Kershaw, Satchel Paige, Bullet Rogan, Bill Foster, Mariano Rivera, Jacob Degrom, Joe Nathan, and Billy Wagner. So just like a mix of like best starting pitchers of all time on a rate basis, and Mariano Rivera, Billy Wagner, and Joe Nathan. Yeah.
And it's not relievers' fault that they don't get to start. It's just that's what they got put into. You know, David Ortiz was a designated hitter. You can't make the distinction that he only played half the time. Mm-hmm. Like, I know a lot of people wanted to take that away, but by rate basis as a hitter, he's one of the greatest that ever hit. It's a bit ridiculous to try to make a justification between the two. But it's back again to the strategic voting. It's just this year you didn't see any momentous climbs, and it seems like a lot of people just didn't vote just to not vote. Or keep their ballot really small of like Todd Helton and Jeff Kent. I think I saw one ballot that was like just Jeff Kent.
Yeah. Definitely need people to be considering the whole ballot rather than just the players that they liked or being selective.
Right. And that's honestly what I think the call to action is over it. It's just a change to just vote with your brain and not your heart or whatever else it is. Because if you
your ego.
Your ego. If you don't vote for Barry Bonds, you don't have a heart. But we'll segue more into our predictions for the 2022 season when it does eventually happen. If the MLB and MLBA will come to terms. We're just going to talk about our article a little bit, and we'll start with what's one team that we thought missed the postseason that will make it in 2022, and we'll start obviously with you, Jake. What's your pick?
So my pick was the Detroit Tigers. I didn't realize until later that my World Series picks were both teams that didn't make the postseason last year either. So I could have easily done either of those, but I guess I'm doing a whole playoff field of teams that didn't make it last year. But I had the Tigers because their 77-85 record last year was pretty misleading. They were a young team at the start of last year. They started off really cold as they were just getting going with their young starters and the young lineup being led by Miggy Cabrera hitting a home run in a blizzard on opening day. But they went 8-22 through their first 30 games, which was through May 4th. And that was a .267 winning percentage, which is absolutely horrible. But after that, they went 69-63, which was an over 500 winning percentage, 523 to be exact, for the rest of the season. So that shows that they had a different baseline that they played on through the whole year, that they should be a lot closer to that than what they put up at the beginning of the year and what their end of season record suggests. I think they're easily going to be an over 500 team, which already puts them in contention in their division. The White Sox were pretty good last year, but the Guardians are not, and they've lost a lot of players in the past few years, whether that be trading away Kluber and Clevenger and those guys, and Carrasco, or trading Lindor and such, or just not filling their outfield spots. But I definitely think the Tigers are going to be a team to compete with in the AL Central because of that record, but also because they signed Eduardo Rodriguez prior to the lockout, who is a really underrated pitcher. He really underperformed his expected stats last year. His ERA estimators were a lot lower than his actual ERA, which was in the mid fours. So I think he's going to be a lot better in that really pitcher-friendly ballpark. And they're going to call up their top prospects, Spencer Torkelson and Riley Green, who are each, I think they're each top 10 prospects in MLB total, at least top 15. But they're both going to hit the ground running, and they could really turn that lineup from like mediocre to elite if they come up and hit. How about you?
Don't forget about Javier Baez.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how I missed that. Yeah, and they signed Javier Baez to shortstop, who's going to provide great defense and big power as long as he can hold back the strikeouts.
Yeah. My team that missed it was a little bit more on the beaten path, and I had the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays won 91 games last year, and they finished 4th in the AL East. And I think they lost on like the last couple days out to the Yankees for the Yankees to get in. The Yankees, I actually have them pipped probably to compete closer to winning that division with the Rays, so long as they can get a little bit more more offense from their role players to replace what they lost in Marcus Semien. And obviously this is way too early predictions, not accounting for the lockout and any more additions that teams will make. And the Blue Jays signed Kevin Gossman, and I believe they extended Robbie Ray.
Barrios. Robbie Ray's with the Mariners now.
Yeah, Barrios, that's right. And their rotation has, at least on paper, stayed probably about the same. And they lose a little offense from Semien, but they also have a very young team. Bo Bichette and Kevin Biggio, and obviously Vlad. It's Vlad. It's really tough to bet against him now. You know, he probably only lost out on the AL MVP because Shohei Ohtani exists. Any other year that, you know, doesn't include an alien playing baseball, he probably wins the MVP.
Unless Mike Trout's healthy.
Well, he's an alien too.
Fair.
But yeah, that's more of what I think. Plus, they'll get a full season from Alek Manoah and hopefully a full season from Nate Pearson. And that just kind of makes that rotation pretty nasty in the AL East. I mean, you know, the Rays aren't a big offense team. The Yankees are a strikeout team. The Boston Red Sox are who knows about the Red Sox now? I mean, God only knows how they made the playoffs last year because they barely improved their roster and only really lost Eduardo Rodriguez. But that was my pick. I had the Blue Jays. And we'll go on to who do you think made the postseason that won't make it in? And I'm fairly certain we had the same pick.
Yeah, if you pick the Cardinals, which might have been the easiest pick, then we had the same pick. I think the biggest thing that people remember from the Cardinals last year was obviously their franchise record-breaking 17-game winning streak, which was pretty incredible, but also was maybe the main culprit to how they snuck into the postseason. Here are some stats from before that incredible winning streak. The Cardinals entered September 12 and a half games out of first place in the NL Central with a negative 12 run differential, which is not good. They were being outscored in total by other teams. And after that 17-game win streak and the last few games of the season, they finished the season 90-72. Only 5 games out of first place with a plus 34 run differential. So obviously they were on another level during that streak that they didn't touch the whole season prior to that. They had lots of aging veterans on their team last year, especially in the rotation, and in the lineup, they're going to be counting on more aging veterans like Arenado and Goldschmidt. And I'm not doubting their abilities. I just think that they're not going to get any better from here. Like in their mid 30s, they're not going to be getting any better. They're going to be counting on a lot of young, unproven players who have shown high ceilings that may be unsustainable, like Tyler O'Neill, who we will talk about later. They're just relying on a lot of things that are going to be hard to repeat next year, especially that huge winning streak.
Yeah, that's more or less what I had to say about it. Like you said, their lineup is kind of anchored by, you know, guys that have Cardinal magic, and we'll see if that continues. And Paul Goldschmidt, Arenado, and a 400-year-old Yadier Molina who can't hit anymore. Their only real add so far is Steven Matz, and that doesn't move the needle enough for me to be like, oh, well, they'll compete for the wild card with a Padres team that should be better than they were last year, a Mets team that should be better than they were last year, and a Phillies team that should be better than they were last year, you know, barring calamity or the Metsing or whatever. It's just, you know, they slipped in at the wild card. I don't think they're better than the Brewers. You know, that division the NL Central is bad. It is what it is. It's a bad division. The Reds are looking like they're going to sell. The Cubs have already sold everybody that has any value, obviously. They have basically the Brewers to compete with, but the Brewers are just a lot better than the Cardinals are on paper. And I think that they'd maybe win probably around 85 games, but that's not enough to get in the wild card. I don't think they'd get in.
National League is going to be tough this year. It's going to be competitive.
It's definitely going to be tough. So let's quickly go over our MVP picks and Cy Young and our Rookie of the Year predictions. Let's start with you. We've already talked about a couple of these guys. Who's your pick for AL MVP?
I went with the easy alien route with Shohei Ohtani after he hit 46 home runs, stole 26 bases last year. That's already incredible on its own. That makes him incredible in fantasy. That makes him incredible in real life, just showing that power and speed. And on top of that, he was a freaking pitcher. He pitched to a 3.18 ERA with just a blazing fastball, a devastating splitter, a crazy slider. He was just incredible last year. So I just don't see how he's not the MVP every year until his arm falls off, because nobody else is getting close to that production of both sides of the ball. And I think the only thing to think about next year is, will he have to live up to his 21 performance to be able to get votes next year? Like if he falls short of that 46 home runs, if he hits 30 home runs, steals 10 bases, and has like a mid-3s ERA or a low 4s ERA, are voters still going to think that that's MVP worthy? It is. If he had done that first, I think he would have had an MVP last year if that's what his season was. But I think because he set the bar so high, it's going to be hard for him to catch that again. And also it'll be interesting to see if Trout takes votes away from Ohtani, as a lot of times when you have two MVP caliber players on one team, they'll take votes away from each other, because it's like one guy can't be the most valuable player. Two guys can't be the most valuable player for one team. You know what I mean? Most means one person.
Right. My pick, I already talked about him, as Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think, like I said, barring any other circumstance that does not include Shohei Ohtani, I think that he would have been the MVP already. And just based on his peripheral numbers, I think it's sustainable. I think it is sustainable. He loses a little bit of protection in the lineup with Simeon. But, he still plays in a very hitter-friendly division, not just ballpark, which he does that too, but he plays in a very hitter-friendly division because of all the short porches, like Yankee Stadium, plays at Rogers Center, plays in Boston. The Orioles are BP. It's just, I think, like you said, if Shohei Ohtani comes out and he puts up a season like 30 home runs, 10 stolen bases, and he pitches to like a 3.7 ERA, even though that should probably merit him winning MVP, I think voters would probably, if Vlad puts up similar numbers, vote more in the realm of towards Vlad, just because, I think there's a bit of an acknowledgement. It's like, okay, well, Vlad was probably MVP 1A to Shohei Ohtani, Shohei Ohtani is just doing things that have never been done in baseball before. It's tough to not vote for that as the MVP. Vlad's put up the numbers to be an MVP.
Definitely.
Who do you have for the National League? Because I think we have the same pick there too.
All right. I have Juan Soto. I wrote this in the article, but I remember discussing with my friends before they announced the results that if Bryce Harper doesn't win the 2021 MVP, that was going to be his last chance, because not for a lack of production on his side, but because Soto and Tatis are just otherworldly talents that they're going to take over the National League MVP discussion for the next decade, I think. And I think Soto is the one that is going to get the better of Tatis in that department, because he's just got that amazing plate discipline, and he hasn't dealt with the shoulder problems that Tatis has dealt with. Not that Soto hasn't dealt with his own injuries, but here's a stat that points out that amazing plate discipline. In his first 4 seasons, which is 2018 to 2021, he's had a .432 on-base percentage, which is incredible by itself, but it's the second best in the MLB during that time, behind only Mike Trout at .442, and 33 points higher than Harper, who's in third place on that list. So yeah, I think Soto shows more power next year after he tapped into his power at the Home Run Derby in Coors last year. And he's basically the closest thing we have to a modern day Barry Bonds, which means he's not getting into the Hall of Fame.
That's right. Okay, so I also had Juan Soto, and I had Juan Soto, honestly, and I tend to say this, it's tough to bet against Juan Soto. It's a childish Bambino. He's just so good and so young, and he's playing on such a bad team that, like you said, there is no one on the Nationals that is going to take away MVP votes from Juan Soto now. And last year he was a freak in the second half. He walked twice as much as he struck out. He had 53 RBIs just in the second half on a terrible team. This is after they sold everybody. He had .525 on base percentage. It's
incredible.
Just those are Barry Bonds numbers that he put up. He's so good. I think the only ones that would even be up there with him would be Tatis and maybe Harper if Harper puts up another good season and the Phillies make the playoffs, but that probably hinge on the second part more than anything. Soto's just so good.
And the scary thing is that he can get better.
Yeah,
he's so young that he could just keep getting better.
Yeah, he's just a freak, and I wouldn't bet against him for the next 10 years. For me, he's the best hitter in baseball.
Definitely. And I don't think being on a bad team takes away from his candidacy, because if you look at last year, all 6 candidates, American and National League, for the MVP were not on playoff teams.
Right.
So we're in a different age of MVP voting.
It's a good thing too. So who are your predictions for American League and National League Cy Young?
All right. I had a tough time choosing in the AL. I didn't really think there were too many good choices, so I went with the easy one. I went with Cole, and surprisingly, he's never won a Cy Young. He was very close a couple years ago when Verlander beat him out on the Astros, but I think he's got a good chance of doing that this year, just with not too much competition in the American League. And in a down year, he posted a 3.23 ERA with 243 strikeouts, and that was a down year. So anything he does in the future is going to be better than that, and that should automatically put him near the very top of Cy Young conversation. And then in the NL, like I said on the last podcast, I have Sandy Alcantara. He was my dark horse last year, but now I think he's the front runner. He had 197 innings pitched in 2019 and 205 in 21, showing that he's got elite volume already in his past. He's got a 3.49 career ERA. So that should easily be under 3 next year if he can maintain his increased strikeout numbers that came as a result of his 98 mile per hour average fastball velo. But most importantly, he increased his strikeout percentage 6% from the first half to the second half, which hints at a much higher ceiling of strikeout numbers after he's been sort of like a strikeout per inning sort of pitcher in the past.
Yeah, I'm a big Sandy Alcantara fan. I had a weird pick for AL Cy Young that I want to talk about. And pitches for the Boston Red Sox, and it is not Chris Sale, it's Nathan Yavaldi. And the reason I picked Nathan Yavaldi is because of his underlying numbers. You know, you can look at him and he had a decent season just off traditional stats, 3.75 ERA. He pitched 182 innings, strikeouts. You know, he had 195 strikeouts, but then you look at his peripheral numbers, and guess what? He had a 2.79 FIP playing in a incredible hitters division against really good teams with 25% K percentage, and he only walked a batter about 4.5% of the time. It's really good. Opposition average of 252, and he's just nails. He just anchors that rotation so well. And he does it with a hammer curveball that's almost unhittable. Doesn't give up contact. And just an example, opposing batters against his curveball, which was his put-away pitch based on usage percentage, slugged 228 against it all year.
Damn.
And that's playing in a division with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, Marcus Semien, Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, just for a start. I like Yavaldi. It's a weird pick. I wanted to go with one off the beaten path, and I think he has the potential to do it. And my NL pick was Jacob Degrom. Like you said earlier, there's only 9 pitchers ever with an ERA plus 150 or above with 900 innings pitched, and Jacob Degrom is on that list, and he still plays. He's just in the middle of one of the most dominant starting pitcher stretches that baseball has ever seen. And I don't think that goes away. I know he gets injured every year. I don't think that goes away this year. The division kind of just got a little weaker. The Nationals aren't as good. The Marlins are still climbing out of a rebuild. They're getting there, but their lineup isn't. They've only got a couple guys on there that are really worth anything hitting wise. I just like Degrom. I think it's like with Soto. It's just really hard for me to look at the candidates and be like, well, Degrom won't win.
Yeah, I think both of those picks are very reliant on them staying healthy throughout the year, but they do have just incredible stuff that could pull through.
All right, now let's go to Rookie of the Year. Who's your AL and NL Rookie of the Year? And I know this is really going to be tough to get a grasp on, just because you don't know when teams are going to call up their prospects, especially teams that have good enough prospects to call up. They're normally bad, and they normally won't call them up until they're completely ready to go. Who'd you have for AL and NL really quick, and we'll get on to our breakouts.
All right. In the AL, I had Bobby Witt Jr., who we talked about earlier. He's the number 3 prospect according to MLB Pipeline, the number 1 shortstop prospect. He's the number 1 Royals prospect. He was the 2nd overall pick in the 2019 draft, and last year at AA and AAA, he batted .290 with 33 home runs and 29 stolen bases. I think that by itself makes him one of the top candidates. But the fact that people were expecting him to be called up last year, I think guarantees his call up this year. And so I think he's going to have a great opportunity to show how amazing his bat is at a premium position. And then in the NL, I also have a different shortstop. This one's 6'7". It's O'Neal Cruz. He's the number 52 prospect according to MLB Pipeline, the number 3 Pirates prospect. Last year at AA and AAA, he batted .310 with 17 home runs and 19 stolen bases. I think that wasn't a full season. I don't know if he was injured or what. But what makes him the most interesting is he came up for just a couple games last year in the major leagues, which already helps that he could be up really early into the season next year. But he turned heads by posting a 118.2 max 118.2 mile per hour max exit velocity, which makes him one of 15 players in the entire MLB to cross that 118 max EV threshold. So that already puts his power at another level compared to just everybody in the major league. So he's a Giancarlo Stanton-esque shortstop with the size, with the power, with the max EV, and his projections next year by Steamer project him for 21 home runs, 14 steals, and a 122 WRC plus, which I think would be more than enough to at least get him into the conversation with a lot of big prospects, hopefully being called up next year.
I think those are really good picks. I didn't know anything about the exit velocity numbers that O'Neal Cruz is getting. That's ridiculous. It's just, I don't want the Cubs staff to play against him for very long. My predictions for AL Rookie of the Year was Shane Baz, and for NL Rookie of the Year was Joey Bart. I've got a lot more about Shane Baz. Shane Baz, for me, he threw 13.1 innings for the Rays in 2021, and for me, he looked like the real deal. It was a limited sample size, but he struck out 18 batters in 13 innings. And his fast against him, hitters had an XBA, so expected batting average, of 167, and I think their X slug was their X slug was 356.
That's crazy. And
with his fastball, with his fastball and his slider, which are his 2 primary pitches, it just gets even more ridiculous. 143 actual batting average against, 178 XBA for his fastball, with a 31% put away percent and 30 whiff percent. His slider had a 40.7 whiff percentage and an XBA of 164, an X slug 274. Hitters didn't hit him. I think he's going to be a big piece of the Rays. Actually, in the article, if you read it, I actually have them winning the World Series. I think he'll be a big piece of them winning the World Series.
Yeah, he was incredible in the minor leagues too.
Yeah. It's just even more ridiculous every day how bad the Pirates got fleeced in that trade for Chris Archer. It's just so dumb. And he throws his fastball high 90s, slider high 80s, and it's just he is a tough one to hit. In the National League, I chose Joey Bart. I think Joey Bart, for me, just has the most opportunity, at least right now, with Buster Posey retiring. I think he'll probably be the Giants' everyday catcher, or at most be the beneficiary of splitting the most time with a veteran backstop. And I think he's not the best. He's a good defender. He's not the best hitter, but I think he'll grow into it. And I just think that as long as he's a solid contributor on a Giants team that makes the playoffs again, I think he'd probably get it. I think the NL is just so tough to tell. That was my pick. You're the Giants fan. What are your thoughts about Joey Bart?
Yeah, I was pretty disappointed by his initial debut. He didn't do that great when he was first called up. But he was the number 2 pick in the 2019 draft, I think. I really hope he does well. I'm it's pretty sad seeing Posey go, but I don't know. I think I've heard a lot of different opinions on him. I obviously want him to succeed, so I think I would be more positive about his outlook than most people as a Giants fan. But
He's put up
he's
decent
got big
numbers in the
power.
minors.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's got a chance to be really good. I hope he's really good. It's just really hard to tell with prospects, and especially with catcher prospects. They take so much longer to develop because they're so focused on being a catcher, which is one of the hardest things to do in baseball.
Yeah. So based off our predictions from next season, let's talk about some players from the previous season with the 2021 breakouts and buying and selling some of them. Let's start with your buys. You had Luis Robert, Austin Riley, and Frank Schwendell. Tell me a little bit about each of them.
Yeah, first I wanted to go over the qualifications for how I came up with finding these breakouts, and it required the player put up a WRC plus in 2021 that was 35% better than career average, and the percentages is built into WRC plus. It's on a percentage-based system where 100 is league average, and any number over that is a percentage higher than that. So 35% better than their career average and 25% better than their career best WRC plus, and they had to have played a minimum of 10 games to acquire that career best, 5 games before 2021 and 250 plate appearances in 2021. So that gave us a list of 11 guys who met those qualifications. And then from there, I wanted to tell whether or not it was going to be worth it to buy into them next year for fantasy. And like you said, Luis Robert was one of those buys. His 2021 WRC plus was 157, 57% better than the league average. And prior to that, he had only played one season. So it's sort of surprising to see him on this list of breakouts after he finished second in Rookie of the Year voting in 2020. But in 2020, he put up a 100 WRC plus and very low average. He struggled in a number of places, and that can be seen in his improvement from 2020 to 2021, where he improved his average over 100 points with the help of a 394 BABIP. But his batting average floor should be a lot higher than that BABIP suggests. He hits the ball really hard. He's really fast, and he had a 297 expected batting average, which is 99th percentile, pretty sure. So that gives his batting average a really high floor, despite what a 394 BABIP would say. And it's all a result of him just cutting down on the strikeouts, which can always be a huge help for offensive players. He had a 32.2% strikeout percentage in 2020 and dropped that over 11% to 20.6% strikeout rate in 21 with the help of being more aggressive somehow. He increased his swing percentage almost 4% up to 61.5%, as well as making more contact in the zone. So he was more aggressive, stopped taking pitches as much. He had shown pretty good plate discipline in the minors, but he was obviously being too passive, sort of pulling a Kevin Biggio, being too passive, not swinging enough, and started swinging more, making more contact in the zone, and it changed everything for him. StatCast Swing Take Runs has him for a plus 24 run value after he had 0 in 20, so that shows how much his discipline has changed. The only problem is he doesn't really walk. So when he's struggling to put the ball in the field, he's going to struggle to get on base. He's going to struggle to make opportunities to score runs, to steal bases, etc. But he hits the ball so hard. 99th percentile, 117.7 mile per hour max exit velocity, and a 455 xwOBA on contact puts him in elite company, shows that he has some incredible power. And if we look at what he could do next year, ATC projections just came out, which are one of the best, most accurate projections, much more accurate than Steamer. But still very similar to the Steamer projections, where they have him for a 286 average with 29 homers and 18 steals and a 128 WRC plus. And that's just with what he's done so far. I think being on a team like the White Sox not only pushes up his runs and RBI, his counting stats and such, but I think his max EV and his StatCast metrics suggest a higher power ceiling than 30 home runs. I think he can reach 40. I think he can be one of the best players in the entire league. And that can be seen in my best case and worst case scenarios for him. My best case was Ronald Acuna Jr. And I was basing these scenarios based off last year's performances. And obviously Ronald didn't have an amazing performance last year, but he's perennial 40-40, 40-30 contender with a high batting average. And I think that's exactly what Luis Robert is. And Luis Robert's an even better fielder, one of the best fielders in the league. So he's going to stay in the lineup. And so I think that makes his worst case Ramon Laureano, who shows power, speed on a different lower level than Robert, but stays in the lineup every day because of his amazing fielding. What do you think about Robert next year?
I agree with what you said about him. I don't watch very many White Sox games, but from what I've seen of Luis Robert, it did look like from watching the shortened season, he has gotten infinitely more aggressive in the zone, and hitting in the zone will help him because that lineup is so deep. He will get pitched to. And that's one of the big things. Like you said, he's going to stay up in the lineup every day. And if they're going to end up having to pitch to him, he's going to produce some amount of value just inherently. And he's an excellent defender. Offensively, I think he does look a lot better given limited sample size from 2 seasons. He played his first year in a shortened 2020, and then he played 68 games last year. But, all he really needs to do is walk a little more, and I think the value just goes through the roof. Let's go on to your next buy, which was Austin Riley.
Yeah. Everybody was waiting for him to break out this year after he dropped his strikeout percentage over 12.5%, down to 23.8% in 20, but he didn't see any results change. He still was the same low batting average, not tapping into his power. But then in 2021, he put up a 135 WRC plus after putting up 86 WRC plus in his career prior to that, which was 2019 to 20, with a high of an 88 WRC plus in 20. And that was because he maintained those plate discipline changes. In 2021, he had a nearly 8% walk rate and over a 25% strikeout rate, which was much lower than what he was putting up before. He was well over 30% in his rookie year, which is completely 36%. Unsustainable. But 36, you said?
Yeah, 36% strikeout.
That's incredible.
The 5% walk rate.
Unsustainable at all. So he really boosted those, and that changed everything. He batted .303 with 33 homers, 107 RBIs, and an .898 OPS, which was over 100 points higher than what he put up in 20. The main culprits for that was his dropping his whiff percentage, which means when he swings, he's not missing the ball. He's making contact. He's staying in the at bats, keeping himself alive, and that was huge to allow him to see more pitches. And he dropped it each year from 19 to 20 to 21. And one thing that could be a part of that is him dropping his first pitch swing percentage, which means he was less aggressive at the beginning of bats, allowing him to see more pitches. He dropped his first pitch swing percentage by 11%, over 11% from 20 to 21, which shows a different approach at the plate, being more patient, allowing himself to see more pitches. And that's huge for going forward, especially because on StatCast, he was pretty good. He had a 279 XBA, which is only about 25 points lower than his actual BA, and that's very high for an XBA. That's a good XBA. And additionally, he had a 290 plus average, 500 plus slugging against all 3 pitch classifications, so fastballs, breaking balls, off-speed pitches, and a 345 or better xWOBA against all those as well, which shows that he could handle all different types of pitches, which leaves fewer avenues for pitchers to attack him next year. And speaking of next year, his projection has him at 271, 31 homers, and 119 WRC plus, which would not be the level that he reached last year, but I think with those gains in strikeout percentage and whiff rate and stuff, that he's got a higher batting average floor than he showed previously, and he's always had big power. And being in one of the best lineups in the league in the Braves gives him the upside of a Rafael Devers and the downside of a Ryan Mountcastle.
Which still isn't even that much of a worst case scenario.
No, he was great last year.
Yeah, Mountcastle still hits for power. One of the things that jumps off the plate, you preached about his plate discipline. Going from 2019 down to 20, he has gotten better at swinging in the zone and his zone contact. He's improved tremendously from his rookie year, where he started out really strong and then he kind of got figured out. And his swinging strike percentage has gone down to 13.1%. So he's taking more pitches and he's waiting for his pitch. And when he gets it in the zone, he makes hard contact on it because he's always made hard contact. His launch angle has gone down a little bit. His rookie year was about 21% or 21 degrees. And now it's right around 13, 14, I think. And he's just hitting the ball hard. If he gets a pitch to see and makes contact with it, it's going to get hit hard. And like I said about Robert, and like you said about Riley, he plays in a really good lineup, and that's such an underrated aspect of being a good hitter, which really is kind of counterintuitive. If you're a good hitter in a bad lineup, they just don't throw you anything. That's why Juan Soto is ridiculous too, but Juan Soto walks a ton because no one bothers to pitch to him because he plays for the Nationals. You can't pitch around Austin Riley in the Braves lineup. Just can't do it. So he's going to get pitches to hit, and he's going to hit them. I like Austin Riley for 2022. And your last one is my guy, Frank Schwendell, Frank the Tank. Let's talk about him a little bit.
All right. Yeah, I like him as well because he used to be on the A's. So when he was coming up, I was sort of excited, but he came out of nowhere last year. He got called up by the A's prior to the trade deadline, maybe just to show him off a bit before they tried to ship him off. And he did get shipped off to the Cubs, where he was incredible. He posted a 342 average and 13 home runs in the 2 months that he was with the team, and 152 WRC plus across the whole season, which totally overshadows his negative 81 WRC plus from 2019, which was his only previous major league experience. But he was actually not traded to the Cubs. He was claimed off waivers by the Cubs. The A's couldn't find a suitor to trade him to, but he's a 29-year-old rookie, which sort of might put a kibosh on people thinking that he could continue what he's doing next year. But there's lots of things that point towards him being a unique hitter that has a chance to stick with the Cubs next year, even entering his age 30 season. He incredibly put up a 15.8% strikeout percentage and a 112.5 mile per hour max EV, which makes him one of 14 players to have a strikeout percentage less than 16 and a max EV over 112, which includes the likes of Machado, Vlad Guerrero, Juan Soto, Rizzo, Freeman, just some of the best hitters, the guys who can avoid strikeouts and still hit the ball with authority. And so I think that bodes well for his future. On top of that, the players that are on that list that didn't perform too well, maybe like, let's say Harold Ramirez, Rizzo, Odubel Herrera, Albert Pujols, those players all have a history of hitting too many ground balls, at least last year. And that's what held back their power. And Schwendell hits more fly balls than the league average. So I think that bodes well for him being able to, reach the ceiling that the better players on that leaderboard have, because he keeps the ball in the air rather than hitting it hard on the ground. He also had a plus 21 run value on StatCast swing take runs in just 2 months. That's a cumulative stat. I think you can get negative, so it's not really cumulative. It's like WAR. But getting up to 21 in just under 2 months is pretty solid. And he did have a 348 BABIP last year, but that came with a 270 XBA. And I think his average is going to be around 260, 270, which is more than serviceable. That's above the league average right now, which is around 240. And next year, his projections are 265, 21 home runs, and a 103 WRC plus, which isn't that great, but Schwendell's not going to be going that early in fantasy drafts. He's not going to be counted on as anybody's like main first baseman, but he does have the ability to get upwards close to 30 home runs, and bat over 270, close to 280 if he really does continue what he did last year with the low strikeout rate, which keeps his floor really high. But also his floor is sort of bottomless because he came out of nowhere. We don't really know what to expect. He gets such a small sample size. So that's why I have his best case as Nelson Cruz from last year, where he batted around 270 with almost 30 home runs. And his worst case is Maikel Franco, who was unplayable last year. They have very similar plate discipline metrics and StatCast metrics. And so that made me slide Franco in there. But I really think that Schwendell's going to do a lot, or continue to do what he did last year at a reduced level.
Yeah. I'm a really big fan of Frank Schwendell, being a Cubs fan. He was just last season was miserable, and he was a really cool part of last season at the end when it was actually kind of fun to watch. I I know the Steamer projections have him at 26 home runs, 268 average with 316 on base, 108 WRC plus. I think he could easily be better than that. I know the sample size is really small, but judging based off his pitch tracking data, he doesn't swing and miss at any pitch. He just makes good contact. I think it completely depends on, like you said, about guys he has a similar profile to. He has a tendency to get on top of the ball, and he does have 40. I think he had a 41% ground ball percentage. A lot of hits just kind of squeaked through. I think it depends on him hitting the ball in the air, and that'll be what gives him more value. Wrigley Field is also a kind of a weird ballpark to hit into. Winds swirl in it, so a lot of the times, even if you do hit fly balls hard, they just kind of die. I think he could be really good. I'm hoping he could be really good. And I think he does have that sustainability that would have him at least as, a good enough player, maybe not, an MVP level player, but he'd be a nice little piece for, what will be a 30-year-old second-year player. You did have a couple sells on your list. One of them was a little controversial. Let's talk about Cedric Mullins.
Yeah. I did have Mullins as a sell, and I don't think it's because I don't think he's going to be good next year. He had probably the biggest change out of anybody, the most notable change. He was a switch hitter for his whole career, all the way up until this year. He stopped switch hitting and focused solely on batting from the left side. That led to a 30-30 season and a 9th place finish in AL MVP voting, and sort of put him in the upper echelon of not only fantasy baseball players, but of just all baseball players. He was one of the best outfielders last year with a 136 WRC plus. Batting from the left side allowed him to increase his fly ball percentage and his hard hit percentage, which led to his big power breakout, increasing his ISO, which is slugging percentage minus average, so just extra base hit percentage, up to 228. He raised it over 110 points. But for me, I don't think he's going to do as well as he did last year, but I don't think he's going to be bad. I don't think he's going to regress all the way back to what he was as a switch hitter, because he obviously made one of the stickiest changes, which is just stop switch hitting, which is one of the hardest things to do in the MLB. The thing that keeps me away from him is how early he's going in fantasy drafts. You've got to make him like your number one outfielder. I play in a lot of points leagues, so obviously he's not going to be going that high because stolen bases aren't as valued in those type of leagues. But I don't think you're paying for what he did last season, and I don't think he's going to be able to repeat that. I think he'll be able to get close. I definitely see like a 2020 season at least, but he's not going to bat 300. He's going to be on the Orioles, who are not going to have a good team. He's going to have regression in lots of aspects. I just think there's lots of other players around that area that have shown what Mullins has shown, but for a longer time with more safety, like Teoscar Hernandez is going after him in fantasy drafts. And he already showed last year that he's got a much higher batting average ceiling. He's shown for multiple years that he can perform at this level. And I think it's sort of risky taking Mullins in the first couple of rounds, first 2 or 3 rounds, banking on him reaching a 25 season, because nobody else has that power speed upside after him. But I think you're risking a lot. My best case scenario for him was a Bo Bichette, obviously power, speed, average. He can definitely do it again. We don't know. I think he's got a chance of doing it again. I think he's going to fall just a little short. Well, his worst case is Jonathan VR, where you still got the power, a little bit of power, a lot of speed, but just the batting average not there anymore.
Yeah, the thing with Cedric Mullins that, like you said, Cedric Mullins for me just has a really, really small sample size. He's got 1 full season, and that 1 full season is when he's just now not switch hitting and seeing it from the left side of the plate. So it's like for me, it seems like a mixed bag. Like he could either replicate it, or he could just go to being a pretty good player and not an elite player. It's just you see it all the time, where one guy will have an off the wall season and just not do it again, or not reach the same heights. I still like Cedric Mullins, and I think he's a great player, but you are making that risk based on, one season's worth of information. Your second sell is one we mentioned earlier, Tyler O'Neill.
Yeah, I definitely think this one's going to be controversial as well. He had a 144 WRC plus last year, but he did a lot of his damage during that 17-game win streak that we previously mentioned about the Cardinals. His big problem that I think going forward is that he strikes out way too freaking much. He's had a 34% strikeout percentage prior to 21 and 31.3% in 21. So that's just way too high. Like, it's just unsustainable average. It's unsustainable strikeout rate. If you're striking out that much, you're just leaving too many holes in your swing. You're leaving too many opportunities on the table at the plate. What makes him stand out is he's got incredible power. 97th percentile, 17.9% barrel rate, and a 97th percentile, 583 X slug. So the power is without a doubt there. And he's really fast. He's got a 29.7 feet per second sprint speed, which is 98th percentile. I think I said that. So he's obviously fast. He just doesn't steal a lot. And that's because he doesn't walk a lot and he strikes out too much. So he's not getting like so many opportunities to get on base and steal. But that's what allows him to post such a high batting average on balls in play, because he hits the ball hard and he's really fast. So he's able to beat out infield singles, and he's able to hit the ball through shortstop's gloves when he hits it 110 miles an hour or whatever. But I think his average is going to regress no matter what. He just strikes out way too much. He whiffs on 34.7% of his swings, which is way too high. And even though his BABIP was 366, it might not come down too much, but I think he's going to bat a lot closer to 250, 260, just because he strikes out way too much. And unless he makes a change there, then he's gonna struggle a lot to put the ball in play next year, where ATC has him for a 255 average, 31 home runs, 13 steals, and a 119 WRC plus. And if you have to take him really early on in drafts, it's not going to be worth it. As he hit 234 against breaking pitches last year, which leaves an obvious avenue for pitchers to attack him, which we've already seen pitchers do a lot recently, is turn to their breaking pitches, because they're not only better, but they're better at striking guys out. And I think with such an obvious hole in his swing for breaking pitches, and with all the strikeouts already, pitchers will just use their sliders and curveballs increasingly more against him, giving him a tougher time, and making him more of like a Pete Alonso with a little bit of speed, or even possibly on the worst case side, a Bobby Dahlbeck, who just never could figure out the strikeouts last year, except for a month.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about Tyler O'Neill, and I was looking at the ATC projections while you were talking about them. And ATC projections still have him striking out about the same amount and walking just a little bit more. I think he's honestly... He does have a high BABIP just because he is fast, and he does hit the ball hard. But you can also look at that as potentially a little bit of an outlier. His BABIP, according to the 2022 ATC projections, is 317, which is a lot closer to league average. I think it really depends on if he can get lucky and if he can still hit the ball hard against the fastball, because, like you said, a lot of pitchers are now probably going to figure out the bit of a hole he has in his game, and he doesn't really hit off speed. He doesn't really hit breaking pitches very well. That leaves him, you hit the fastball, and that's it. Plus, looking at the NL Central now is almost completely dominated by, apart from a couple guys on the Reds, junk ballers. Like, you've got Corbin Burns and Woodruff and
Peralta
and Castillo. And then look at the next real top dog pitcher you kind of have in that division after those, and it's Marcus Stroman. Like, the entire Cubs starting pitching line or pitching rotation is just junk ballers right now. Plus, the Brewers bullpen has a lot of that. The back end of their starting rotation has a lot of that. The Reds will remain to be seen, but they're pitchers that will learn to attack him a lot better, since he does just completely struggle against breaking balls.
Yeah, he's going to have to make an adjustment if he wants to continue the success he had last year.
Yeah, so I think that's what makes or breaks him. And your last sell before we wrap everything up with our last segment is Byron Buxton.
Yeah, I'll go through this one real quick. He's obviously somebody who has dealt with tons of injuries throughout his career, but they've all been different. Last year, he took his offensive game to another level, though. It started off with a 426 average, 8 homers, and a 265 WRC plus through April before sustaining an injury. And I don't know if he sustained the injury in May or just like directly after April. But when he returned fully healthy in September, he showed no ill effects from that injury. He batted 283, but he hit 9 homers with a 158 WRC plus, showing that he still had that level of offense that he had shown prior to the injury. He had career high StatCast metrics in average exit velocity, max exit velocity, barrel percentage, hard hit rate, and xWOBA, which shows that he was reaching another level with the quality of contact that he was making. And I think that can be attributed to his increased pull heavy approach. He pulled the ball 53.8% of the time last year. So he's obviously making an effort to hit for power, pull the ball down the line in the air. But the main knocks against him are always going to be his health. He's had less than 350 plate appearances every year, except for 2017, every year of his career from 2015 to 20. So the last 6 years, I think that's 7. He's only had one season over 350 plate appearances, which was 511 in 2017. Last year, he had an unsustainable 28.8% home run to fly ball rate, which suggests that his fly balls aren't going to be flying over the fence as much as they did last year. And on top of that, he had a 40.1% ground ball rate, which was similar to the rate Schwendell was putting up. And so that might be a little too much of a lean on hitting the ball on the ground. But he is super fast, automatic 20 plus stolen base upside, but he didn't really use that to his advantage last year. He stole just 9 bases in 250 plate appearances. Maybe he stopped stealing to stay healthy, which would be good for him because I think it's more important that he stays healthy than if he steals, but that would really change his value in fantasy leagues. ATC has him for 270, 29 home runs and 15 stolen bases next year, which is great, but that's within 500 plate appearances. And as I had mentioned previously, he hasn't topped 350 only once in his whole career, his 7-year career. He's only topped 350 once. So 500 is sort of, I don't know, I think out of the picture. Maybe you can put him at 400, but taking him super early in drafts is going to be tough because he just can't stay healthy. He's got the ceiling of a Tatis Jr. if he stays healthy the whole year. He's got big power, big speed, and he's one of the best fielders in center field. But because he never plays, he's got the floor of an Austin Slater who also has big power and speed. But nobody really knows who that is unless you're a Giants fan or a deep league fantasy baseball analyst.
Yeah. My thing with Buxton also kind of lies with Cedric Mullins. I just don't know how he'd project over a full season because he put up crazy numbers last year, but he put up those crazy numbers in 61 games. He only had 254 plate appearances. Like, how can you really judge just how good a player is when they don't play? And ATC projections have him, still good. Don't get me wrong, but especially the things that jump off the page dropping to me, the slugging number and ISO. He had a 340 ISO in 2021. That's insane. That's
insane.
Unbelievable. And also unsustainable. 2022 ATC has him for about a 267, which would probably fall more in line of what I think he is. He's a great player. But he doesn't stay healthy, and he seems like right now it seems like his value lies in a sprint and not a marathon, which is counterintuitive to playing fantasy sports. So I think he could be a great player, but he's really risky. Like you said, he's got a really high ceiling if he does play like a Tatis, but also you don't know that ceiling I don't know that ceiling well at all because he played 61 games. And the season before that he also had a pretty solid year, was the shortened season. So, I mean, you look at him over like a 2-season span and he's played 100 games, like just 100 games in 2 seasons. How can you know what you have? And even before that, 2019, he had 87 games. He hasn't played even remotely close to a full season since 2017. And we all know he's gotten better then. He's got a pull heavy approach and he's hitting for a lot more power then. But in 2017, I mean, he looked pretty pedestrian over a full season. And I know that's not realistic to what he put up now, but you have to think, I mean, no one sustains a 340 ISO over a full season unless you're like Barry Bonds. So I don't really see him as Barry Bonds. So I'd be kind of out on him too.
Yeah, unless you get some crazy value like he's going super late in your draft, then hop in like after pick 100 or 150. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely hop on him. But we're going to wrap things up with our last segment. We're a baseball podcast, so it's time to bring in the closer. I'll let you take it away, Jake.
Yeah. So we're going to be ending our podcast with this new segment called Bringing in the Closer, where we highlight the career of a closer, either from the distant past, the recent past, or maybe even current closers. But we're going to try to cover everything, and we'll bring them in and they'll shut down the podcast and get that save. So our first closer we're bringing in to shut down the podcast is Francisco Rodriguez, also known as K-Rod. He had a 16-year career that spanned from 2002 to 2017 with the Angels, Mets, Brewers, Orioles, and Tigers. When he was first called up, he paired a high 90s velocity fastball and a devastating curve with the occasional changeup, but that curveball was completely devastating. Nobody could touch it, and obviously his velo died off throughout his 16-year career. But when he first came up, he was something else. In that first year as a rookie, he tied Randy Johnson's record for the most wins in a single postseason with 5, which was later tied by Steven Strasburg in the 2019 postseason, because teams just hadn't seen him. He was coming out of the bullpen like sneaking wins from everyone because teams just hadn't seen that high velo fastball and that hammer curve, and so that just made him unstoppable in that first postseason of his career. Throughout his career, though, he was a 6-time All-Star. He won the Rollins Relief Award, which is the award for best reliever, which has been renamed. But he won that twice, and he was obviously a 2002 World Series champion in that year that he put up the 5 wins in the postseason. That was against the San Francisco Giants in that World Series. Looking at his career stats, he put up 24.1 baseball reference WAR in 976 innings pitched. He saved 427 ball games with a 2.86 ERA and a 1.16 whip with 1,142 strikeouts. The thing that stands out most about Francisco Rodriguez, though, what makes everybody remember the name K-Rod, is that he set the single season saves record in 2008. He saved 62 games, the only player ever to even reached 60 saves, and he got 62. In that 2008 season, he threw 68.1 innings pitched with a 2.24 ERA and a 1.29 whip with 77 strikeouts. Not the same crazy strikeout numbers we see now, but that made him one of the best in the league at that time in the early 2000s. He surpassed Bobby Thigpen's record of 57 from 1990 when he was with the Chicago White Sox. So that was a 12-year-old record that he broke. And nobody has come close since. Only Edwin Diaz has really gotten close to that record. But he finished 3rd in Cy Young voting and 6th in MVP voting that year as a result of breaking that saves record. He also led the American League in saves in 2005 and led the MLB in saves in 2006 with 47. So just an incredible career by K-Rod. Obviously, the single season saves record, big fastball, but he's here to close out the podcast.
All right, so that's all we've got today, guys. Check back with us 2 Mondays from now, where we'll hopefully have Isaiah back, and we'll go over the rest of our article with him, and we'll get some of his opinions on his way too early 2022 predictions. Didn't want to leave him out today, but check back with us then. All right, thank you, guys.